Now then, welcome everybody. That was the rather wonderful, striking opening track from Henry Cow's second album, Unrest, from 1974, I think. But I'll come back to that, yeah. So this one's called Gems from the Attic, Part 1. And it's not Gems from my attic, it's a good friend of mine who recently told me that he had some albums that had been up in the attic or loft for quite some time. So I was curious, and he got them down so I could have a look, and I'm going to turn that down a little bit. And I pulled out a dozen or so which I just thought were really interesting. In fact, nearly his whole collection were interesting. There was not a lot of overlap with my collection. A lot of it was what you would call sort of left field, on the edges of particular genres of music. So yeah, very interesting. So I've just picked out a dozen or so, and I've split them into two batches. This is part one, and what I'm going to let me just stop that. The first split, the first half, I've grouped under the title the sort of Canterbury Scene, and I mean I suppose I was familiar with the Canterbury Scene from the early mid-70s through reading the music press and everything, and I sort of think of Soft Machine, Kevin Ayres, Robert Wyatt, Caravan, those sorts of artists, and but these I think were probably more on the sort of edges or fringe of that scene that we've got tonight. I mean, the scene itself, loosely defined I suppose by a sort of fusion of prog, jazz, rock, psychedelia, and sort of characterised by what you might call whimsicality, I suppose, a sort of silliness mixed with seriousness, and also a peculiarly English sort of sensibility. I mean, I always thought of it as sort of public schoolboys having fun, you know, a bit like Monty Python, which when I sort of left school and, you know, got into my own little class war, as I saw it, I sort of I became sort of anti private or education, public school, and I sort of dismissed artists like that, and Monty Python and things like that. So I never really got into this at the time. But anyway, I'm just going to talk through what we've got. I've got some notes, so I've got the right dates and everything. And the first one, I'll go in chronological order as I'm wont to do on this channel. The first one is Miller Coxhill, or Coxhill Miller. I'm not actually sure which is the, I think Miller Coxhill is the first side, yeah. £1.49 it cost when it was released in 1973. So Lol Coxhill is a jazz saxophonist, and Steve Miller is the piano keyboard player from Caravan, and they combined for this, and this is a really lovely, gentle, at times beautiful album. It occasionally does stray into the sort of avant-garde, I suppose you would call it. There's one or two tracks where Coxhill's horn playing, soprano sax or whatever sounds a little bit like the clangers sort of rehearsing, but in general this is just really, really accessible. In parts, absolutely gorgeous. Lovely stuff, yeah. I had not come across it or heard of them before, but and I'm not sure, some of these albums I'm going to show tonight are probably pretty hard to find these days, I would imagine, but Coxhill Miller from 1973. The next one is the one that I was just playing there. This is Henry Cow, classic cover. I remember the cover from the time. This is 1974. This is their second album. The first album was Legend or Legend, and this is Yeah, Henry Cow. So formed by Fred Frith, guitarist, I suppose mainly, and keyboard player, sax player Tim Hodgkinson. And by the time of the second album, they'd added John Greaves on bass and piano and vocals, Chris Cutler on drums, and the classical musician Lindsay Cooper on oboe and bassoon. And this is, really, really interesting album. I mean, apparently Henry Cow often composed music that they were as yet unable to play, as a sort of challenge to themselves to try and get to be able to play it. And they've been described as determinedly inaccessible. I think one critic said he described this as a fine line between bracing free atonality and mindless cacophony. For me, this is an album of two sides. I think that track I played first is stunning. That's the opening track, Bitten Storm over Ulm. And I love the third track on side one, Ruins, as well, the 12-minute epic, Ruins. But the second side, difficult, challenging. Apparently they went into the studios with only half an album of compositions, and so they basically improvised most of side two, and I've only give this two listens, as I have with all of these albums, so maybe it takes more time, but I found it quite difficult. I think I have heard that perhaps if you're gonna, the first album would be maybe the place to start if you're gonna look at Henry Cow, but they were dropped by their record company, Virgin. Quite a few of these artists in the Canterbury scene were signed by Virgin, when Virgin were, Richard Branson trying to be sort of, I suppose, cool and trendy, and but very quickly he obviously wanted to follow the money, and he didn't want uncommercial bands like this, and they were dropped. But they went on to play in Europe, particularly. They were sponsored by the Italian Communist Party, and who assisted them to get gigs and records and what have you. But really interesting band. Henry Cow, that's their second album, Unrest, from 1974. The next one was also in 1974. This is Hatfield in the North. And I do remember this band, but I couldn't remember what they sounded like. And it's a lovely cover, by the way. It's a gorgeous sort of photo on that side. And then on that side you've got the band and some of the sort of players and assistants who've assisted this album on the one side. And then you've got the cast of the sort of Western soap opera Bonanza on the other side. Brilliant. Trying to remember the names of them all. Yeah, Hoss, the Cartwright family, Bonanza. Yeah, but this is it's Hatfield in the North. They're like a prog supergroup. I think they've got members of ex-members of Gong, Egg, Caravan in there. Absolute superb musicianship. It's original. It's complex. It's subtle. The opening track, absolutely gorgeous. What's it called? The Stubbs Effect. A real sort of subtle jazz sensibility going on. I mean, listen to this, it could get me back into prog. I ditched prog in about 1975. But this really could get me there. It's a superb album. I'd like to hear more of this band. I don't think they made many albums, but this one's fantastic. Hatfield in the North. I think it's just called Hatfield in the North. From 1974. The next one, from 1977. This is Q full stop Roan full stop. This is a collaboration between John Greaves from Henry Cow and Peter Blegvad, who I'll say a bit more about Peter Blegvad in a minute, but basically he'd come across from America in his family had come across in the late 60s, I think, to avoid him and his brother being conscripted to fight in Vietnam. and he hung out with the Canterbury sort of crowd, and did a few collaborations. I think one time his band Slap Happy, who I think were quite different from the Canterbury Scene, did sort of merge to some extent with some of the members of Henry Cow, I think. So anyway, this is a collaboration between them two. John Greaves basically supplying the music, and then separately Peter Blegvad supplying the lyrics. I think musically this is really, really interesting. It's arty, it's avant-garde, it's proggy, there's jazzy sort of sense in there. But lyrically, this makes no sense to me at all. There is a lyric sheet actually, which is really, really helpful. I've been through it twice, but even with a lyric sheet, it makes no sense. So the first song is 22 proverbs, and it's just a list of proverbs basically. But other songs are sort of mixtures of anagrams, palindromes, other sort of verbal games going on, which way over my head, I'm afraid. And I just find the whole thing very, very distracting. Apparently there has been a book published which sort of explains this, and to some extent the lyrics or it can be helped to be interpreted by looking at the sort of artwork on the cover, but as I say, I don't know, I just found it absolutely distracting. Musically interesting, lyrically, no. It was actually released on the same day as Never Mind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols, which, yeah, I suppose, you know, in my little world anyway, this was the sort of stuff which the Sex Pistols were and others were blowing away. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting album. It totally failed commercially, and one critic said that it failed commercially due to the anti-intellectual zeitgeist that prevailed in late 70s England. Well, yeah, I think I was perhaps part of that. But anyway, that's Q Roan by John Greaves and Peter Blegvad. So having listened to Peter Blegvad on that and listened to his lyrics and really, really struggled with it, when I come to this, which is Peter Blegvad's solo album by him, King Strut and Other Stories, I thought, oh dear me, here we go, this is going to be difficult. It couldn't be farther from the truth. I was really, really surprised. It's very different from all the other stuff. I mean, it's a lot later for a start, it's 1990. But lovely stuff, absolutely quirky, accessible, moving songs, nice melodies. There's a good list of collaborators from Andy Partridge to Danny Thompson working with him on here. And we're going to go out with, because it's at 7 o'clock and we're 1 hour before the kick-off of the Euros semi-final, England versus Netherlands. Yeah, can England play badly again and still proceed to the final? Probably the way things are going, but anyway, I'll turn around and we'll go out with the opening track from here, King Strut. Totally different to the other four albums. Turn that up, turn that on, and thanks, and I'll go through part 2, which is a sort of more diverse set of albums, hopefully next week. This is King Strut, Peter Blegvad.
Or cruelty, I forget which one, and the state took custody of their sickly son. Well, no one ever dreamed that one day he'd become King Strut.
Cheers everyone. See ya. Enjoy the footy.
King struck, flew off the